Hey Lanier, this is Drew Lassen, presenting my final mix portfolio. This is my first song. It was the third song off of the Stephen Griswold session, which was for the National Music Sanctuary. And just to give you an idea of how the song sounds, I'll play a couple seconds of it. Yep, so I'll first start off with the drums. For the sub kick, I didn't do anything besides putting on a low pass filter. And the reason for this is that there's pretty much no content up here that you'd want, and there's pretty much no content at all. The only thing, we experienced a little bit of crosstalk between this and one of the guitar channels. Because the amps were in a separate room, so there's no way the sub kick would have picked it up. Anyways, this is how it sounds like with the Q6 equalizer plug-in on. It might be a little bit hard to hear because it is a sub kick. And with it off, yeah. So obviously you can hear that guitar just a little bit in there. Probably wouldn't have showed up in the mix, but why not get rid of it? For the kick in, this is how it sounds like. So, not the greatest sounding kick in the world. And this is what I did to attempt to fix it. Put a little bit of a low shelf on it so that because that's obviously the sub kicks area, so might as well let that shine in. Took away a little bit of 250 hertz to get rid of that kind of cardboard sound, and boosted a little bit at 4K because there's a little bit of presence there, and after boosting there in the mix, it let the kick come through. And as you can see here, I duplicated the kick so that I could kind of use parallel compression, in which this one isn't compressed at all and this one is overly compressed, and then blend it in. And I applied the exact same plug-in equalizer on this one, and then I used a 1176 emulation plug-in with the all buttons in selected, so it gives it that really aggressive and kind of in-your-face sound. And this is what it sounds like. Yep. Then I slightly blended it under this, as you can see. So the kick without the overly compressed and with. This really adds presence in the mix. And for the overheads, the main thing I usually do in overheads is I put a high pass filter on them, so that way it gives really room for the close mic'd kicks, and it always tends to sound a little bit kind of muddy when there's no high pass filter applied to them. And I boosted a little bit around 6.2K to give it a little bit of a shine. This is what it sounds like without these two high pass filters applied to the overheads. So a little bit muddy and kind of loose sounding in the low end, and with it really sounds empty by itself, but once these kick close mics are in, they really fill out that space. And then similar to the kick drum, I parallel compress this, and obviously this song doesn't really call for an aggressive sounding drum kit. I very slightly blended it under, and obviously this isn't as overly compressed as the kick, as the all-in buttons isn't selected, but I selected a ratio of 8, quick attack and a relatively quick release, and bump the input and output, and this is how these sound. Another problem with really compressing the overheads is that they picked up a lot of vocals, and obviously we don't want that in there, so that's why those are slightly blended under. And with both, it sounds like. Yeah, and this drummer tended to kind of, as you can see by the waveforms, like really play kind of all over the place and utilize a lot of the dynamics, which is cool in a live sense, but when you're listening to it, you still want the dynamics there, obviously, but you don't want them this quiet, then getting to this loud, because that's just kind of abrupt. Anyways, here is the snare top. And obviously for this, I do a little bit of the same thing that I do with the overheads, in that I, apply a high-pass filter at a, relatively higher frequency in order to make room for the kick. And just because those microphones are so close to the kick, really don't want that bleeding in there, because then the kick doesn't really sound as defined as it can. And I also boosted at around 2K, just to really give it a presence in the mix. And here's what it sounds like. I'll play where he's not actually playing on the rim and actually hitting the snare. And without it. And kind of took out a little bit of the lower end of the snare as well, which I don't feel like is, a necessary frequency in the snare, just because then everything tends to get muddied. I believe we did have a snare bottom on this as well, but I decided to omit it, just because I didn't think that it sounded good and didn't really add anything into the mix. And for the next, the toms, the first thing that I always do when editing drums is I always take out the tom mics where he's not playing, simply because it's completely unnecessary, and it, once you cut it out, the kit instantly sounds a lot better. So I manually went in and just cut around where he was actually playing the tom, and this is what the tom sounds like. Just by itself. So a little bit hard to hear just because he plays it so fast. And I pan this one to the left because I'm a big fan of a drummer's perspective, so that it sounds like you're sitting behind the kit, because I just think it's unnatural when the hi-hats to the right, or all that kind of stuff. And for equalization, I put a high-pass filter on here just to get rid of the really unnecessary lows, and I boosted a lot in the low end and took away kind of that mid-range muddiness, and I boosted around 2.5K to give it some presence and attack in the mix. And then for the low tom, I did pretty much the exact same thing, and here's what the low tom sounds like. And obviously pan that to the right. And here's what they sound like in context. And since I'm done explaining the kit, here it is as a whole. Drums. Yep. Next up is the bass. The first thing I did to the bass was applied a small, a low shelf, because it kind of had this boomy sound to it, so I didn't want that, and also to give a little bit more room for the sub kick and the close mic'd kit itself. And I took out around 300 hertz, just because it was this kind of nasty mid-range sound and kind of a little bit of a honky sound. And the next thing that I did is I applied this CLA bass plugin, and the first thing I did was took the bass all the way down on here, because it kind of just overpowered everything, and there's already enough bass on here that I didn't need any additional additive EQ in the lower end. And I put bumped up the treble a little bit and set it to this bark selection so that I could, really cut through. I compressed it. I took off the sub because, again, unnecessary low end. For distortion, I selected the growl preset and tamed it down a little bit to really get some presence in the mix. And then I really like a wide bass setting, and so I selected the wide and, increased it so that it doesn't sound like it's just coming straight up the center. It almost sounds like it's multi-tracked, which sounds weird for a bass, but it just really gives it a nice sound, I feel. And here we go. Here's how the bass sounds. Yep, that's how that sounds. And for the vocals, the very first thing I did with the vocals is that there were 2 extra vocal mics in the room right next to the kit, so obviously that muddied everything up. And the singers never sang on this song, so I deleted both of those, and instantly it sounded a lot better. And here's how the vocals sound with everything off. Oop, my bad, soloed.
Going to stick my chest out and bear the brunt. Well, I'm going.
So the first thing I did was I applied a de-esser, which is pulling down 5.5K because I really thought that was kind of an annoying frequency in his voice and really kind of cleared it up. And the next thing I did, put a high-pass filter on it to get rid of the room sound. I'm from the kick, just a lot of unnecessary low end. And, you don't really, there's just no content there you really want in his voice. And I slightly attenuated around 300 or to 400 hertz, just because it was kind of a too mid-range kind of muddiness sound, and I boosted it at 4K, and it gave it a nice presence in the mix. And the next thing I did was, as you can see, I slightly compressed it with a little bit slower of an attack, but it's still pretty fast, and a medium release with a ratio of 4:1. And this is how it sounds with everything off.
To keep on.
Then everything on.
Well, keeping my head up.
Oops. Yeah, and so in the mix.
To keep on. Well, keeping my head up. Well, I'm going to.
Yep. And then for the, let's see. Oh, that's right. For the first guitar, let's see here. Yeah, the same ones. For the first guitar, I applied a high-pass filter because there's no information there you want. And I put a little low shelf right here just because I kind of had a boomy quality to it, and so I made way for like the bass and everything. And then I attenuated around like 550 hertz to get rid of the little mid-range, and I kind of brightened this guitar up. And for this one, since it was a lower guitar, I boosted right here, so that way it was easy to differentiate these 2 guitars and they weren't masking each other. I pulled away around 2K, and I gave it a high shelf boost to really brighten this guitar up. And as you can see, they are both panned to the right, and I panned the second guitar to the left. And for this guitar, high-pass filter, take out a little bit of the mid-range, and boosted 2K for this presence. Same thing for this microphone. And, right and left, because they did have 2 guitarists who were standing on opposite sides of each other. And then for the guitar solo, he switched over from a clean setting to a distorted setting. And for this one, high pass filter as always, took out around 500 and boost that 2K for presence. And for guitar solos, I like to add the CLA guitar presence. CLA guitar plugin, because it adds some nice presence and crunch and everything. And for this one, I took away pretty much all the bass in order to thin it out so it really stands on top of the mix. I left the treble where it's at, and I kind of attenuated everything else, but they're still like really audible, as you probably heard the reverb and delay after I stopped it. And so here's how that sounds in context. And without this CLA guitar, oops, here we go. When it loses that high end, it kind of, really gets lost in the mix. And here's the lap steel. And for this one, he came in and redid it. So this was the original DI, and this is the one he sent us. And he recorded his amp as well as a DI. And the first thing I did was made sure that they're lined up so that there's no phase problems, because obviously DI is a lot faster and gets recorded quicker. So for the amp, high pass filter as always, a little bit of mid-range mud out, and around 2.5K to add some presence. Then I slightly compressed it, took away kind of that initial bite and left the release kind of midway there, and selected a ratio of 4:1. And for both of these, I use this Aphex Vintage Oral Exciter. It really kind of adds more high end than anything, but it gave it this certain bite that really made it like stand on like top of the mix. And because a lot of times he's doing these pretty tasty fills, and he has a solo here and there. So here's how the lap steel sounds by itself. Without this this vintage exciter, just to A-B the difference. And with it, and and for everything, I always, I set up a reverb and delay auxiliary track, and I bust the snares, the toms do it, especially the toms, because I kind of cut off the toms, and so that adds a little bit of room sound that wasn't there and that got chopped out. And I bust the vocals to the reverb and delay auxiliaries to make them sound a little bit more full, and same for the lap steels. And for the reverb, I selected this PSP Easy Verb and selected this room preset because they're actually in a room and didn't want to wanted to make it sound like they're actually playing in a room, because that's where it was recorded. And since it was recorded to video, if I selected a chamber or a club setting, that would sound pretty weird and pretty obvious what was happening. And I bumped the time up a little bit and made it a little bit more presence in the mix. And then on each of these buses, I selected how much exactly I wanted going to the reverb auxiliary. And for the delay, I selected this Waves H delay, and I didn't. It's a pretty quick delay and not much feedback, and as you can see, it's only at 26%, because I didn't want to make it sound too synthetic, just to really fill things out. Yeah, that's it for this song. Here's the guitar solo just to show you.
Well, keeping my head up